It was a sweltering evening, the air thick with the promise of rain, and I, Elena, 38, widowed too long, sharp-tongued and soft-curved, lounged in our dim living room, my silk robe catching the faint glow of a lamp. The heat clung to me like a second skin, oppressive and unrelenting, the kind of sticky warmth that made the simplest movements feel laborious. The windows were open, but no breeze came to relieve the stagnant air, only the faint hum of cicadas and the occasional distant rumble of thunder. I'd been sitting there for what felt like hours, though it couldn't have been more than 20 minutes. My thoughts wandered aimlessly, drifting between the mundane and the melancholic, as they often did these days. 3 years had passed since my husband's death, and while the sharp edges of grief had dulled, a quiet ache remained, a constant shadow that followed me wherever I went. Tonight, though, the ache felt different, restless, almost alive, as though the storm brewing outside had stirred something deep within me. I shifted on the couch, the silk of my robe sliding against my skin, and let out a slow breath. The faint light of the lamp cast long shadows across the room, painting the walls in muted gold. It was a soft, almost intimate glow, and I found myself idly tracing the hem of my robe, my fingers brushing against the delicate fabric. The sound of water trickling from the bathroom pulled me from my thoughts. A moment later, Jake stepped into the living room, fresh from a shower, a towel slung low on his hips. At 22, he was all restless energy and dark, tousled hair, his lean frame still carrying the remnants of adolescence but with the beginnings of something more defined, more assured. Water glistened on his chest, catching the lamplight, and for a moment, I was struck by how much he resembled his father. The same broad shoulders, the same effortless grace. I looked away almost immediately, my gaze settling on the window. Jake was my stepson, a reminder of a life I had briefly shared with his father, a life that now felt like a distant dream. We coexisted in the same house, polite but distant, our conversations clipped and practical. He was young, still figuring out who he was, and I was a widow, trying to navigate a world that felt increasingly unfamiliar. The power went out without warning, the lamp's glow snuffed into darkness. A distant rumble of thunder echoed through the house, the first harbinger of the storm. I stood too quickly, my foot catching on the edge of the ottoman, and stumbled forward, my hands instinctively reaching out for balance. My fingers found Jake's bare shoulders, his skin warm and damp beneath my touch. He steadied me instinctively, his hands gripping my arms as I righted myself. For a moment we were frozen in place, the air between us charged with something neither of us could name. And then his towel slipped. My fingers brushed against something firm and unyielding below his waist, a jolt of electricity shooting through me at the contact. I recoiled sharply, my breath catching in my throat, my cheeks burning with a heat that had nothing to do with the stifling air. "Sorry," Jake mumbled, his voice rough with embarrassment as he fumbled to adjust the towel. Our eyes met in the faint moonlight that filtered through the windows, a silent exchange that lingered too long, that said too much. I stepped back, my heart pounding in my chest, the memory of that fleeting touch seared into my mind. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Jake retreated to his room, muttering something about trying to find a flashlight, and I stayed in the living room, my thoughts racing. The storm outside had yet to break, but something inside me was already unraveling. Later, in the privacy of my room, I couldn't stop myself. My fingers slipped beneath the silk of my robe, tracing the curve of my hip, my stomach, my thighs. My breath came in shallow gasps as the image of Jake, his broad shoulders, his damp skin, his size, haunted my thoughts. My touch grew bolder, more insistent, until release washed over me in a trembling wave, leaving me breathless and unsettled in the darkness. The wrongness of it lingered long after, a quiet ache that had nothing to do with grief. The storm was coming, but it wasn't just the thunder I could feel in the air. It was something else, something dangerous, and I wasn't sure I could, or even wanted to, stop it. Not long after, still cloaked in that restless dark, I found myself at the kitchen counter, a loose sundress clinging to me as I fanned myself against the sticky heat. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and the storm outside had yet to break, leaving the house in a state of uneasy anticipation. My mind, however, was elsewhere, snagged on the memory of that fleeting touch in the living room, the accidental brush of my fingers against Jake, a moment that had left me more unsettled than I cared to admit. I leaned against the counter, the cool marble doing little to soothe the heat simmering beneath my skin. The faint hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room, a steady, almost hypnotic rhythm that did nothing to quiet my racing thoughts. I couldn't shake it. The way his skin had felt beneath my hands, the way his towel had slipped, the way our eyes had met in the moonlight. It was wrong, I knew that, but the memory lingered, stubborn and persistent, like a splinter I couldn't quite remove. The sound of bare feet padding softly on the tiled floor pulled me from my thoughts. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see Jake wander into the kitchen shirtless, wearing only a pair of loose shorts that hung low on his hips. My breath caught for a moment, but I quickly looked away, pretending to focus on the glass of water in my hand. He opened the fridge, the cool light spilling out and casting shadows across his chest. He grabbed a bottle of water, his movements fluid and unhurried, and I found myself watching him from the corner of my eye. There was something about the way he moved, confident, almost careless, that made it impossible to look away. Our eyes caught as he turned, his gaze sliding over me in a way that made the heat in the room feel suddenly more intense. I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening around the glass as I tried to ignore the way his presence seemed to fill the space. "Can't sleep?" he asked, his voice low and rough with sleep. I shook my head, forcing a smile. "Too hot. Thought I'd get some water." He nodded, taking a long drink from the bottle, his throat working as he swallowed. My eyes traced the curve of his collarbone, the way his Adam's apple bobbed, before I quickly looked away. The silence stretched between us, heavy and charged, until I couldn't hold back the question that had been nagging at me. "You're, pretty big down there," I blurted, my cheeks burning the moment the words left my mouth. Jake froze, the bottle halfway to his lips, his eyes widening slightly. For a moment I thought he might laugh or brush it off with a joke, but instead he set the bottle down and leaned against the counter, his gaze steady on mine. "Are you comfortable with it?" I pressed, my voice softer now, almost hesitant. "Do girls like it?" He smirked, a flicker of pride in his eyes that stirred something deep within me. "Takes some getting used to," he admitted, shifting slightly. "Girls usually say it's a lot." The air between us seemed to grow thicker, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. My fingers twitched at my sides, the memory of that fleeting touch flooding back with startling clarity. His fingers brushed mine as he passed me the bottle, the contact sending a jolt of electricity through me that left my pulse skittering. I took a shaky sip, the cool water doing little to quell the heat simmering beneath my skin. We stood there for a moment longer, the tension coiling tighter with every breath, before Jake finally turned and walked away, his silhouette disappearing into the darkness of the hallway. I stayed at the counter, my heart racing, my body wrestling with a curiosity I couldn't shake. The storm outside had yet to break, but something inside me was already spiraling out of control. The blackout stretched into its second evening, the house swallowed by a darkness so complete it felt almost tangible. The oppressive heat refused to relent, clinging to every surface, every breath, as though the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for the storm that never came. I'd spent the day in a restless haze, my thoughts circling back to the previous night, to Jake's voice, low and rough, when he'd admitted, "Girls usually say it's a lot." The memory haunted me, a dangerous mix of guilt and curiosity that I couldn't shake, no matter how hard I tried. I found myself wandering aimlessly through the house, the flickering light of a single lantern my only guide. The air was thick with the scent of rain, the kind of heavy, expectant stillness that precedes a storm, but the downpour remained elusive, lingering on the horizon like a tease. My steps carried me to the garage, the space dimly lit by another lantern perched on the workbench. Jake was there, bent over an old radio, his hands moving with practiced ease as he tinkered with the wiring. The oily air was thick, almost suffocating, and the faint hum of the lantern added to the room's charged atmosphere. I leaned against the workbench, the cool metal pressing into my lower back, my shorts riding up slightly as I crossed my legs. My gaze lingered on him, taking in the way his muscles moved beneath his skin, the way his dark hair fell into his eyes as he worked. There was something about him, something raw, untamed, that drew me in, despite the voice in my head screaming at me to walk away. "So," I began, my voice soft but laced with a teasing edge. "About your size? I'm still curious how it feels." Jake froze, his hand stilling on the radio, and slowly turned to face me. His eyes met mine, dark and unreadable, and for a moment I thought he might shut me down, might tell me to stop. But instead, he just stared at me, his breath coming a little faster, his chest rising and falling with a rhythm that matched my own. The air between us crackled with tension, the kind of electricity that made my skin prickle and my heart race. I stepped closer, my movements slow and deliberate, my gaze never leaving his. "It's dark," I added, daring now, my voice barely above a whisper. "Power's off. Let me just feel it. I won't see anything." He hesitated, his jaw tightening, and for a heartbeat I thought he might say no, but then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. My pulse quickened, my heart slamming against my ribs as I closed the distance between us. My hand trembled slightly as I reached out, my fingers brushing against the fabric. He was already rock. The size is unmistakable even through the material, and a jolt of electricity shot through me at the contact. I moved slowly, testing, my fingers tracing through the fabric. He was huge, with a heat that made my breath catch in my throat. My touch grew bolder, my palm pressing against him, and I felt the way he tensed, the way his breath hitched in response. Jake's hands gripped the edge of the workbench, his knuckles white as I continued to explore, my fingers curling around him. His breathing grew ragged, his chest rising and falling with a rhythm that matched the pounding in my own chest. "Elena," he whispered, my name a warning, a plea, but I didn't stop. My hand moved with a life of its own, my fingers tightening slightly as I stroked. He groaned, low and guttural, and then with a sharp intake of breath, he finished. We froze, both of us stunned into silence, the only sound in the room the faint hum of the lantern and the ragged gasps of our breaths. My heart pounded in my chest, the weight of what I'd done, what I'd wanted, settling over me like a heavy blanket. Jake's eyes met mine, dark and unreadable, and for a moment, neither of us moved. The air between us was thick, charged, and I could feel the tension coiling tighter with every passing second. I stepped back, my hand trembling as I pulled it away, and Jake exhaled sharply, his shoulders slumping slightly as he leaned against the workbench. Neither of us spoke, the silence stretching between us, heavy and unbroken. The lantern's glow flickered, casting shadows across the room, and I turned away, my thoughts a chaotic storm of guilt and desire. The storm outside had yet to break, but something inside me had already shattered. The following evening, the stormy sky hung low and heavy, the air thick with the scent of rain that refused to fall. The blackout lingered, plunging the house into a darkness that felt almost suffocating, but the back porch offered a fragile escape, the faint hum of crickets a soothing backdrop to the tension that thrummed between Jake and me. We sat on the wooden steps, a bottle of warm wine between us, its contents doing little to distract from the electricity that crackled in the air. The wine was bitter on my tongue, its warmth failing to ease the restless energy that coiled tighter with every passing moment. My thoughts kept circling back to the garage, to the way Jake had tensed beneath my touch, the way he'd whispered my name like a plea. The memory of it haunted me, a dangerous mix of guilt and desire that I couldn't shake. Jake shifted beside me, his knee brushing mine, and the contact sent a jolt of electricity through me. His nearness was intoxicating, his presence filling the space between us in a way that made it impossible to think clearly. My breath hitched, but I didn't pull away, the warmth of his skin seeping into mine. He turned to me, his dark eyes searching my face, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken tension, until he finally broke it. "Touch me again first," he murmured, his voice low and rough, the words sending a shiver down my spine. "Please." My heart pounded in my chest, my fingers trembling slightly as I reached out. I hesitated for a moment, the weight of what I was about to do settling over me, but then my fingers brushed against the fabric, tracing the length. He was already ready, the heat undeniable, and I felt him tense beneath my touch. "Elena," he whispered, my name a plea, a warning, but I didn't stop. My hand moved with a life of its own, my fingers curling around him, and he groaned softly, his breath hitching. His hand slid to me, his touch tentative at first, but then he grew bolder, his fingers teasing my skin. His touch was hesitant at first, almost cautious, as if he was testing the waters, but then it grew firmer, more insistent. His fingers traced patterns on my skin that made my breath catch in my throat, his touch sending a jolt of electricity through me. "You're trouble," I whispered, my voice shaky with want, the words barely audible over the hum of the crickets. He grinned, his eyes dark with a hunger that matched my own. "Only if you let me," he murmured, his voice rough and low. His hand moved higher, his fingers brushing against the sensitive skin, and I felt the last threads of restraint fraying, the wine and the dark pulling us into something reckless, something I couldn't turn back from. Then, unexpectedly, his free hand moved to the back of my neck, his touch firm but not harsh. He guided my head gently but deliberately, directing me down. My breath caught, my heart pounding in my chest as I realized what he wanted. "Jake?" I murmured, my voice barely above a whisper, the name tasting foreign on my lips, like a confession I hadn't meant to make. He didn't respond, not with words, but his grip on my neck tightened slightly, his touch both a command and a plea. My lips parted involuntarily, my breath warm against him. The storm outside had yet to break, but something inside me was already unraveling, the tension coiling tighter with every passing moment. The last threads of restraint were fraying, the wine and the dark pulling us into something reckless, something I couldn't turn back from. Later, as we sat in the darkness, the storm still lingering on the horizon, I felt the weight of it pressing down on me, the realization of what we'd done, or almost done, settling over me like a heavy blanket. The line between us had been crossed, and I wasn't sure there was any going back. The storm was still out there, but the real tempest had already begun, inside me, inside us, and there was no escaping it now. The evening had bled into a heavy, sultry night, the air thick with the kind of humidity that clung to your skin and made every breath feel like a struggle. The storm still loomed on the horizon, teasing with distant rumbles of thunder but refusing to break. The house was dark, save for the faint glow of a lantern flickering in the corner of the upstairs hall. I leaned against the wall, my tank top sticking to my back, my thoughts a chaotic whirlwind. I couldn't stop thinking about him. Jake. My stepson. The word felt foreign now, like an outdated label that didn't fit the raw energy that crackled between us. The memory of the garage, the way he'd tensed beneath my touch, the way he'd whispered my name. It haunted me, a dangerous mix of guilt and desire that I couldn't shake. I heard the bathroom door open, the sound pulling me from my thoughts. My breath hitched as Jake stepped into the hall, a towel slung low on his hips, his damp skin gleaming in the faint light. Water droplets clung to his chest, catching the lantern's glow as he moved. He was all angles and raw energy, his dark hair falling into his eyes, his presence overwhelming in a way that made it impossible to think clearly. He froze when he saw me, his gaze locking onto mine. For a moment, neither of us moved, the air between us thick with tension. His eyes were dark, searching, and I felt like he could see straight through me, past the walls I'd built, past the excuses I'd been telling myself. "Tell me to stop," he said, his voice a low growl, rough and desperate, as if he was clinging to the last shred of restraint he had left. I didn't. Instead, I reached for him, my fingers tangling in his damp hair as I pulled him into a fierce kiss. Our lips crashed together, the intensity of it stealing my breath. His hands slid under my shirt, his palms warm against my skin as he cupped me, his touch sending a jolt of electricity through me. My hands dug into his shoulders, my nails leaving faint marks as I clung to him, desperate for more. I'd told myself this was wrong, that it couldn't happen, that it shouldn't happen, but in that moment, none of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was the way he made me feel, alive, wanted, needed. The towel fell to the floor, forgotten, as his hands moved to my waist, shoving my shorts aside with an urgency that left me breathless. His touch was frantic, his fingers stroking me with a precision that made my knees weak, while my own hands gripped him, exploring the hard planes of his body with a hunger I couldn't contain. "Jake," I gasped, his name a breathless plea, and he responded with a low growl, his lips finding mine again in a kiss that left me dizzy. We were a tangle of limbs, our touches frantic, our breaths mingling in the humid air. The sounds of our gasps filled the hall, the raw intimacy of it wiping away the line that had always separated us, the stepmother-stepson boundary that had felt so rigid just days ago. Jake's lips left mine, trailing down my neck in a series of open-mouthed kisses that left me trembling. His hands roamed my body, possessive and desperate, as if he was trying to memorize every curve. My own hands couldn't stay still, gripping his shoulders, his back, anything to anchor myself as the world spun around me. "Elena," he groaned, his voice rough with need, and the sound of my name on his lips only fueled the fire that burned between us. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe, the heat of our bodies pressed together, making it impossible to focus on anything but him. His hands were everywhere, his touch sending sparks through me with every caress. My fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer as our kisses grew more desperate, more urgent. The wall at my back was cool against my overheated skin, but I barely noticed, my entire focus on Jake and the way he made me feel. His hands slid under my shirt, pushing the fabric up and over my head, and I let him, the cool air brushing against my skin a fleeting relief, before his body heat enveloped me again. Our touches turned frantic, the need between us too intense to be contained. His hands explored every inch of me, his touch leaving trails of fire in their wake, while my own hands roamed his body, memorizing the feel of him. The intimacy was raw, primal, the line between us obliterated in a haze of sweat and gasps that I couldn't silence. His hands were everywhere, warm and insistent, tracing the contours of my body with a reverence that left me undone. I felt the heat of him against me, the way his breath hitched as I touched him, and the world narrowed to the two of us, the flickering candlelight casting shadows that danced across the walls. The air was thick with the scent of rain and the faint tang of sweat, and every touch, every brush of skin against skin, sent shivers racing through me. His lips found mine, the kiss deep and searching, and I felt myself giving into it. To him, the weight of everything we'd been holding back crashing over us in waves. When he finally moved, it was with a slow, deliberate rhythm that left me gasping, my fingers tangling in his hair as I clung to him. The intensity of it was overwhelming, the way every touch, every movement felt like it was pulling me into something I couldn't name. The storm outside had yet to break, but inside the house we were caught in a tempest of our own making, one that left us both breathless and trembling. Later, as we lay tangled together in the darkness, the weight of what we'd done settled over me. The line between us had been crossed, and I wasn't sure there was any going back. The storm was still out there, but the real tempest had already begun, inside me, inside us, and there was no escaping it now. My thoughts were a chaotic storm of guilt and desire, the two emotions warring within me as I tried to make sense of what had happened. But deep down, I knew the truth. This was reckless, dangerous, and there was no undoing it. The storm outside might pass, but the one inside me, inside us, was just beginning. The next night, the blackout pressed on, the house a suffocating cocoon of heat and shadows. The air clung to my skin, thick and unmoving, amplifying the restless energy that coursed through me. I sat on the living room couch, a single candle flickering on the coffee table. its faint glow casting trembling shapes across the walls. My hands trembled slightly, my thoughts a tangled mess as I waited. He entered the room quietly, his presence immediately filling the space. I didn't need to look up to know it was him. My body reacted instinctively, a shiver of anticipation running through me. He paused, his dark eyes fixed on mine, their intensity undeniable. For a moment, neither of us moved, the silence heavy with unspoken tension. Then he was kneeling between my thighs, his hands warm and deliberate as they parted me. The hunger in his touch made me tremble, my breath catching as I felt the heat of his gaze. He looked up, his eyes searching mine, and I nodded, my voice barely a whisper. "Please." The word hung in the air, a fragile thread of permission, and he didn't hesitate. His mouth found me, slow and deliberate at first. The wet heat of him sent a jolt of electricity through me, my hips lifting instinctively, seeking more. My fingers tangled in his hair, holding him close as he worked me with a focus that left me breathless. The rhythm became insistent, each second pushing me closer to the edge. Sweat slicked my skin, the oppressive heat of the room and the intensity of his touch making it impossible to think clearly. My body responded with a primal urgency, every nerve alight with sensation as he drove me higher. There was a fleeting moment of hesitation, a whisper of doubt that flickered through my mind, but it was gone almost instantly, melted away by the waves of pleasure that crashed over me. My fingers tightened in his hair as I teetered on the brink of peak. The wrongness of it, the forbidden nature of what we were doing, only sharpened the spiral, adding a dangerous edge to the pleasure that consumed me. It was reckless. It was wrong. But in that moment, I didn't care. I wanted this, wanted him, with a desperation that overrode everything else. When I finally was done, it was with a cry that echoed in the stillness of the room, my body trembling with the intensity of it. He didn't stop, until I was gasping for breath, my body spent and boneless. He pulled back slowly, his eyes dark and unreadable. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the only sound in the room the uneven rhythm of my breathing and the faint crackle of the candle flame. The weight of what we'd done settled over me, a heavy blanket of guilt and desire that I couldn't shake. The line between us, the boundary that had once felt so rigid, was gone, obliterated by the intensity of our connection. He reached for me, his hand brushing against my cheek, and I leaned into his touch, my body still humming with the after-effects of pleasure. His fingers traced a path down my neck, his touch both tender and possessive, and I felt the tension between us coil tighter once again. The oppressive heat of the blackout lingered, wrapping the house in a suffocating stillness. The air was thick, almost too heavy to breathe, and the faint glow of a single candle on the kitchen counter cast long, flickering shadows across the room. I sat at the table, a half-empty glass of wine in my hand, the warm liquid doing little to calm the restless energy that coursed through me. He entered the kitchen quietly, his presence immediately filling the space. I didn't need to look up to know it was him. The way my body reacted, the shiver of anticipation that ran through me was enough. He held a bottle of wine in one hand, his other running through his damp hair as he leaned against the counter. "Thought you might want more," he said, his voice low and rough as he poured himself a glass. I nodded, unable to find my voice, and he took the seat across from me, his dark eyes locked onto mine. The flickering candlelight danced across his face, highlighting the sharp angles and the faint sheen of sweat on his skin. His shirt clung to him, revealing the hard lines of his chest, and I forced myself to look away, my fingers tightening around my glass. We drank in silence for a moment, the tension between us growing heavier with each passing second. The wine was warm, its bitterness doing little to distract me from the way his gaze lingered on me. "You're quiet," he said finally, breaking the silence. I shrugged, my voice barely above a whisper. "Just thinking." He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, his eyes searching mine. "About?" I hesitated, my thoughts a tangled mess of guilt and desire. "About us. About this." His gaze didn't waver, his expression unreadable. "And?" I took a sip of my wine, the warmth of it spreading through me but doing little to steady my nerves. It's complicated. He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that sent a shiver down my spine. Complicated's one way to put it. I looked up at him, his dark eyes filled with a mixture of amusement and something deeper, something that made my breath catch. "We can stop," he said softly, his tone serious now. "If you want to." I shook my head before I could think better of it. "I don't want to stop." His gaze softened, and he reached across the table, his fingers brushing against mine. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through me, and I felt the tension between us coil tighter. "Good," he murmured, his voice rough with need. He stood then, his movements deliberate, and I felt my heart pound in anticipation. He took the glass from my hand, setting it aside before pulling me to my feet. His hands were warm on my skin, his touch both tender and possessive as he guided me to the edge of the table. "Tell me if you want me to stop," he whispered, his breath hot against my ear. I nodded, unable to speak, and he leaned in, his lips brushing against mine in a kiss that was soft and lingering. His hands roamed my body, exploring every curve with a reverence that left me breathless. The heat between us grew, the tension becoming almost unbearable. My fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer as the kiss deepened, our bodies pressed together in a way that made it impossible to think clearly. Eventually, he lifted me, the cool surface of the table a sharp contrast to the heat of my skin. His touch grew more urgent, his hands sliding under my shirt as he explored my body with a hunger that left me trembling. The wrongness of it, the forbidden nature of our actions, only heightened the intensity, adding a dangerous edge to the pleasure that consumed me. It was reckless, it was wrong, but in that moment, I didn't care. I wanted this, wanted him, with a desperation that overrode everything else. Later, as we lay tangled together in the dim light of the kitchen, the weight of what we'd done settled over me. The line between us, the boundary that had once felt so rigid, was gone, obliterated by the intensity of our connection. The storm outside had yet to break, but inside the house we were caught in a tempest of our own making, one that left us both breathless and trembling. The wrongness of it, the forbidden nature of our actions, only heightened the intensity, locking us in a spiral that I couldn't, and in that moment didn't want to, escape. The storm was still out there, but the real tempest had already begun. Inside me, inside us, and there was no turning back. The next morning, the power finally returned, the house buzzing to life with a hum of appliances and the soft click of lights flickering on. I stood at the kitchen sink, my robe wrapped tightly around me, staring out the window at the rain-soaked yard. The storm had finally broken overnight, leaving the ground glistening, the air fresh and cool, as though the world had been washed clean. But inside, the weight of what had happened between us clung to me like a second skin, heavy and unshakable. The house felt different now, smaller, more intimate, as if the storm had stripped away the walls I'd built around myself, leaving everything raw and exposed. I could still feel the echo of his touch on my skin, the warmth of his breath against my neck, and the memory of it sent a shiver through me that had nothing to do with the cool morning air. I heard him before I saw him. The shuffle of bare feet on the hardwood floor, the faint creak of the door. Jake entered the kitchen, his hair mussed from sleep, his dark eyes darting away from mine as soon as they met. There was a tension in his movements, a hesitation that mirrored my own, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The coffee maker sputtered to life behind me, the rich, bitter aroma filling the room, but neither of us reached for a cup. I stood there, my hands gripping the edge of the sink, my mind racing with questions I couldn't voice. The silence stretched between us, thick and unyielding, until he finally broke it. "Morning," he said, his voice rough, barely above a whisper. I nodded, my gaze still fixed on the window. "Morning." He moved closer, his presence filling the space behind me, and I felt the warmth of him before his hand brushed against my arm. The touch was tentative, almost shy, and it sent a jolt of electricity through me. I turned to face him, my heart pounding in my chest, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was charged, the weight of last night pressing down on us like a storm cloud that refused to break. His eyes searched mine, dark and unreadable, and I felt the urge to look away, to retreat into the safety of silence. But I didn't. I held his gaze, my breath catching as he stepped closer, his hand lingering on my arm. "We can't pretend that didn't happen," I said finally, my voice soft but firm. He nodded, his eyes meeting mine, and there was something raw in his gaze, something that made my breath catch. "I don't want to pretend," he said quietly. His words hung in the air between us, heavy and unspoken, and for a moment I wasn't sure how to respond. The coffee maker beeped, the sound startling in the stillness of the room, but neither of us moved. The moment felt suspended, timeless, as if we were caught in a bubble where the outside world couldn't touch us. He stepped closer, his hand finding mine, his fingers intertwining with mine in a grip that was both firm and tender. His touch was warm, grounding, and for a moment the weight of everything we'd done and everything we hadn't yet said felt a little lighter. We didn't name it, love, regret, or something else entirely. We didn't need to. The quiet connection between us was enough, a fragile thread of understanding that held us together in the silence. My fingers tightened around his, and he squeezed back, his thumb brushing against my knuckles in a gesture that was both comforting and possessive. "What happens now?" I asked finally, my voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, his gaze searching mine, and for a moment I thought he might pull away. But instead he leaned in, his forehead resting against mine, his breath warm against my skin. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "But I don't want to lose you." His words hit me like a punch to the chest, the weight of them settling deep inside me. I wanted to tell him that he wouldn't, that we'd figure this out together, but the words stuck in my throat. He pulled back slightly, his hand cupping my cheek, his thumb brushing against my skin. "I need you," he whispered, his voice breaking with the honesty of it. I closed my eyes, leaning into his touch, and for a moment, the world fell away. There was only him, only us, and the fragile connection that held us together. When I opened my eyes, he was still there, his gaze locked on mine, and I felt a spark of something I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was hope, or maybe it was fear, but it was enough to break the silence. "We'll figure it out," I said softly, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. He nodded, his hand slipping from mine as he stepped back, but the warmth of his touch lingered, a quiet promise or a question I wasn't sure I could answer. The coffee sat untouched on the counter, the steam rising in delicate curls, but neither of us made a move to drink it. Instead, we stood there, the weight of our unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. The future felt unwritten, a blank page waiting to be filled, but the weight of what we'd become, and what we might still become, was impossible to ignore. As the morning sunlight filtered through the window, casting the room in a soft golden glow, I felt the first stirrings of something new. It wasn't just guilt or desire anymore. It was something deeper, something that scared me more than anything else. Jake cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "I should go," he said, his voice hesitant. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and watched as he turned and walked out of the kitchen. The sound of his footsteps echoed in the empty hallway, and I felt the weight of his absence settle over me. But as I stood there, staring out the window at the rain-soaked yard, I realized something. The storm had passed, but the real tempest had only just begun, inside me, inside us, and there was no escaping it now. The first stumble had reshaped my desires, our future unwritten but heavy with the weight of what we'd become. And as the house buzzed to life around me, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The hours that followed were a blur. I wandered through the house, my thoughts a tangled mess of emotions I couldn't untangle. Guilt, desire, fear, they all swirled together, each one vying for dominance. But beneath it all, there was a quiet undercurrent of something else, something that felt like hope, though I wasn't ready to name it yet. I found myself in the living room, the room where it had all begun. The storm had left its mark here, too. The faint scent of rain still lingered, and the air felt cooler, fresher. I sat on the couch, my fingers tracing the edge of the cushion where we'd sat together last night, the memory of his touch still vivid in my mind. The weight of it all pressed down on me, the enormity of what we'd done and what it meant, settling over me like a heavy blanket. But there was no going back now. The line had been crossed, the boundary obliterated, and there was no way to erase what had happened. I heard the sound of footsteps in the hallway, and my heart skipped a beat. He appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. "I thought you left," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. He shook his head, his eyes meeting mine. "I couldn't." His words sent a shiver through me, and I felt the weight of his gaze like a physical touch. He stepped into the room, his movements slow and deliberate, and sat down beside me, his presence warm and grounding. We didn't speak, but the silence between us was comfortable, almost familiar. His hand found mine, his fingers intertwining with mine in a grip that was both firm and tender, and for a moment, the weight of everything we'd done and everything we hadn't yet said felt a little lighter. The future felt unwritten, a blank page waiting to be filled, but the weight of what we'd become, and what we might still become, was impossible to ignore. As the sunlight filtered through the windows, casting the room in a soft, golden glow, I felt the first stirrings of something new. It wasn't just guilt or desire anymore. It was something deeper, something that scared me more than anything else. But as I sat there, his hand in mine, I realized something. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning.